rights for the ordinary citizens and keeping public safety is observed. Now we look directly to the 43 current shall issue regimes of 43 states, which have very similar objective values to understand that it is not unconstitutional. In the case of Bruin, these objective standards in the 43 shall issue regime were deemed acceptable. Regulations such as history of criminal record, history of mental illness, potential for a general character trait of temperament, as is said specifically in the shall issue regime of Connecticut.
So with regards to the shall issue licensing that was permitted by Bruin, have narrow and objective criteria, do you believe that this statute is far more discretionary?
Your Honor, it is of our belief that this statute is not far more discretionary, as the values are almost a one-to-one if you look at the shall issue regimes and their requirements, and in this case, this act and this as-applied challenge. Now, this act puts into question two things in particular. The fact that Drew Cantrell, Shooting Stars firearm safety instructor, was entrusted a firearm even though they had a history of criminal record. This is not a subjective value at all. It is simply a question of, does Drew Cantrell have a history of a criminal record? Yes or no? And he did, and thus the act was violated. Does Drew Cantrell have proper training in the use of their firearms? No, he does not, and thus the act was violated. We do not put into question as to whether Drew Cantrell has the right to keep and bear arms. We only put into question whether Shooting Star Gun Club is liable or not for entrusting a gun to a person that may not fully fit the definition of a safe, ordinary, law-abiding citizen. Now we look directly to that of historical tradition in America, given that the historical tradition of America in regards to firearm regulation is reliant upon the fact that all of these regulations mean not to put very uncertain, subjective matters into the hands of individuals, rather uses an objective standard to ensure that all citizens have the right to keep and bear arms while maintaining the public safety and ensuring that the firearms, which are very dangerous, do not go into the hands of criminals, mentally ill, or those that may not use firearms for the proper purpose.
I believe this statute allows for the confiscation of guns from shooting clubs.
No, Your Honor. This act directly states within itself that it would only allow the confiscation of a gun from an individual that has been recklessly entrusted or sold a gun. And this is not an open discretion case. It is very clear that it may only be seized if this person is in violation of the definition of being ordinary, safe, law-abiding.
I will allow courtesy time for him to finish his last one. Please note how much time is.
Your Honor, for all of these reasons stated above, the plaintiff asks that you grant our motion in limine and deny the constitutional objection to the defense. Thank you.
And how much time is courtesy time?
I have around 12 seconds.
Your Honor.
You ready, Councilor?
May it please the court. Opposing counsel just told you that the Second Amendment doesn't apply. Well, that can't be right. The Second Amendment is clear. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. How can the people be said to have a right to keep and bear arms if they don't have access to it? The Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act, in defiance of what the Bruin Court called an unqualified command, seeks to condition the enjoyment of that right under the discretion of a lone gun seller. It therefore violates the Second Amendment, and we ask that you deny plaintiff's motion limit and proceed to the trial without.
So when you say the unqualified command in this instance, could you explain what impact the surety clause have on that argument?
Your Honor, can I ask you to elaborate?
Yes. So there are some surety treaties that allow for businesses to have restrictions with regards to the sale and of guns to individuals who they believe were unfit or not right. So could you explain a little with regards to unqualified demand on this?
Certainly, Your Honor. In the 2008 case, District of Columbia versus Heller, the Supreme Court held that laws issuing regulation, the commercial sale of arms, were not inherently violating the Second Amendment. However, that statement was made in the context of licensing laws. Justice Kavanaugh was clear. Those laws were permissible under the Second Amendment because they contained clear, well-defined criteria that were objective. They required little to no discretion on the part of the issuer, and they were clear for all to see. In comparison, the act in today's case has a totality of the circumstances test, including factors so subjective as general trait of consciousness, intelligence, and even maturity. In comparison to those laws, any gun seller, a private citizen, could deny a person their right to arms simply because they find that they're incautious, immature, or just unintelligent.
So in Bruin, the statute, the statute required the gun owner to prove fitness to a state official. That isn't the case in this case. So how would you distinguish that from what is going on in this law?
Your Honor, it's exactly the same case. In order for a seller to avoid liability, they must ensure that every person they're selling to is fit. However, because the act allows for a 1-year suspension of their retail license, it's actually up to the customer to prove fitness to the gun shop. A gun shop can't possibly ask every single question required by this act, including questions such as the mental health and previous medical conditions of the seller, of the buyer. That violates their medical history and their right to privacy.
So is it your position that the Second Amendment protects someone selling a gun to a person who the seller knows or should know is criminal and probably going to go out and commit a crime with that gun?
No, Your Honor. It's only that this act is overly broad with its criteria. The plaintiff has brought a charge that Shooting Star has sold a gun in violation of this act to plaintiff Justice Harbo. Justice Harbo is an individual with no criminal record, no previous history of recklessly using a firearm, no problems with alcohol, no membership in a terrorist organization. The only part Justice Harbo violates of this act is their inexperience. But Your Honor, we all have to start with somewhere to use a firearm. In order to learn how to use one, you must be entrusted with a firearm to learn how to use it properly. That would be a violation of this act.
Could you see this act ever allowing for any restrictions for the Star Club to make sure that they sell a gun to someone who's qualified?
It's certainly, Your Honor, just not as applied in today's case. As applied in today's case, Justice Harbo's inexperience is the only factor that violates this act. And if interpreted that way, this act prevents any new person to pick up a firearm. They would never be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights.
And do you believe that Shooting Star Club have any responsibility for their employees to be fit with regard to these public property?
Yes, Your Honor. As the 2022 case Bruin commands, the government must affirmatively prove that there is historical tradition for such an act. But Your Honor, in our nation's long history of carrying firearms, no previous act allows for the sweeping prohibition the Responsible Firearms Sales Practice Act makes possible. The opposing counsel pointed to the licensing laws in 43 states. Those shall issue laws had clear criteria. They required no exercise of judgment by the person who is issuing the permits. And even then, the people issuing the permits were government officials who knew what they were doing. In today's case, the discretion is completely in the hands of a lone gun seller. There's no historical precedent for having ordinary citizens be the gatekeeper of fundamental rights.
So your argument is pointed at the statute, but it seems to me that much of the statute tracks a claim for negligence such as negligent custody. Do you argue that the Commonwealth claim of negligence is also unconstitutional?
No, Your Honor. That case is different because this act violates the Second Amendment directly. This is a constitutional right to keep and carry. If that were the case, that there was another constitutional amendment protecting that, then it would be similar.
Your position with regards to the protection of individuals versus a business? Do you think that applies in this situation?
No, Your Honor. In order for the people to be able to keep and bear arms, the business, the employees, and the buyer all have to be protected under the Second Amendment. If any of that was true, then it would be okay for the state to pass a law banning the opening of gun shops, banning the sale of firearms, or banning the hiring of employees who work at this firm. The Second Amendment must extend to all of them, as they are citizens of the United States, and they therefore have a right to keep and bear arms.
And you believe that extension goes towards this?
Absolutely. Your Honor. In order for the people to enjoy their right to keep and bear arms, the people must have access to it. The Responsible Firearms Sales Practices Act is overly broad in terms of its reach. There's no historical tradition backing it up. And it leaves so much discretion in the hands of the gun seller as to allow them to become a fact finder themselves. As such, it violates the Second Amendment protections given to all citizens. And we ask that Your Honor deny the plaintiff's motion in limine and prevent the second count from proceeding. Thank you.
Attorney Tanning, rebuttal.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Shu has just claimed that the lone gun seller must have an exercise of judgment in direct contrast to challenge the review with their clear objective value. However, given that this is an as-applied challenge brought to you by the defense themselves, we only look at the actual actions of shooting star guns and whether they violate the clear objective values that we bring forward. Now, the actual values that we bring forward are: was Drew Cantrell? Did you have a history, criminal record? Yes, you did. That requires no exercise of judgment beyond what businesses already do, such as a background check to show that you did indeed have a criminal record.
So if you had heard the argument of Attorney Shu on behalf of Shooting Star, how did their argument dealt with whether or not the act itself put an undue burden of determining a vagueness as to what's fit or not fit?
Yes.
How would you respond to that?
Your Honor, we counted the notion that this act as a whole is vague. In this application, this as-applied application of it, use very clear objective values. In the actual definition of unfitness, while it may be said that, sure, the actual word itself, unfit, is vague, we then later define it in the act as having very strict criteria, 9 criteria, in fact, such as general character trait of temperament, backed by the Shallot regime in Connecticut, presence or lack of presence of criminal record, backed by America's historical tradition, as well as the 43 Shallot regime, lack of mental illness, also backed by historical tradition of America, as well as the Shallot regime. Now, if you look through all 9 of these are backed by historical tradition, but the thing is, we do not have to look at all 9 of these, but rather we look at 2. Drew Cantrell did not have proper training. Drew Cantrell had a criminal record. Very clear, objective values that can be answered by a yes or no. To say that the seller must use discretion in determining, in order to determine whether Drew Cantrell was unfit, just to say yes or no, is simply wrong. Thank you, Your Honor.
The court will take 2 minutes, please. Note that not to be commented on the handbook. court thanks both counsels for your arguments, and the court is now ready to rule. Based upon the arguments presented today, the court is going to grant the plaintiff's motion unanimously. Accordingly, the court finds that the fact of the firearm, the 20-year period civil code section 2007, the Responsible Firearm Sales Practice Act, as applied in this case, is constitutional under the Second Amendment. The court finds that the restrictions that are placed on it are more of the level of surety to make sure that the firearms are being sold to individuals or allowed to be used to individuals of state caliber, and the court finds that the evidence with regards to both the Justice Carbo as well as Cantrell, the court is going to allow the motion to be granted. So at this time, I'm going to allow the judges a few minutes to make their rulings. Thank you, Mrs. Albert. I'll give you 1 minute to put my notes in there. 1 minute. Thank you. Thank you very much. At this time, there's a couple housekeeping rules. We are now ready to begin the trial. Okay, with regards to that, each party is going to be given an opportunity to make an opening statement. But before we do that, can each counsel table identify themselves and make their opinion?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Haley Ray Newport, and I, along with my co-counsel, will be representing the plaintiff in today's case, Justice Carbo. Can my co-counsel introduce themselves?
Thank you.
Zach Johnston for the plaintiff.
Alexander Tan for the plaintiff.
Holly Pierce for the plaintiff. As well as our witnesses.
Good afternoon. My name is David Ingber, and I will be playing Justice Carbo.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Olivia Devoto, and I'll be playing Ross Hernandez. Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Lenore Leo. I will be playing Dr. Morgan Judd.
And finally, our timekeeper.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Nicole Beltman, and I will be fulfilling the duties of timekeeper.
Thank you all.
Your Honor, the plaintiff has some housekeeping matters we would like to go over. Would you like us to handle those now as part of our introductions, or after opposing counsel introduces themselves?
After opposing counsel has introduced.
Yes, Your Honor.
Opposing counsel for the defense, please stand and identify yourself and your opinion.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Shayla Detta, and along with my co-counsel, Brianna Shuda,
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
and Brianna Shuda. Good afternoon, Your Honor. You represent the defendant, Shooting Star Gun Club.
And your witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Danielle Foley, and I'm Avery Moon.
My name is Cal Stewart. I'll be playing Drew Cantrell.
And my name is Scarlett Winterholm, and I am Skylar.
And
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Louis Nutson, and I will be fulfilling the role of defense attorney.
That concludes introductions from the defense.
thank you very much. Now, plaintiff's counsel, you indicated you had some housekeeping when you ready.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff would like to invoke Rule 615, request that all witnesses remain constructively sequestered with the exception of representatives.
That would be great.
We would also like to ask permission to move around the courtroom freely.
That would be granted as well as for both sides to have an opportunity to reposition to make sure that they have the opportunity to witness and view any exhibits that might be presented to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. Just to clarify, does this permission extend to the witness as well as the bench?
Yes, it does, as well as the well.
Thank you, Your Honor. And finally, opposing counsel and the plaintiff filled out a character evidence form. Would you like a copy of this?
Yes, please. Counsel, you have seen it.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Does the defense have any housekeeping they'd like to address?
Yes, Your Honor. First, the defense has prepared an exhibit binder containing all exhibits unaltered that opposing counsel has viewed and approved. May we place this at the witness stand for convenience during the trial?
Yes, you may.
Secondly, we'd like to ask your preference as to approaching our and opposing witnesses during examination.
Just approach them, well, they have their exhibits, but make sure you identify the exhibits that you are going to be having the witness look at, and make sure that counsel for the other side is aware of that exhibit, and then you may approach them.
Yes, Your Honor. Additionally, we would like to note that we are designating Skylar Coleman as our party representative today. And with that, the defense is ready to proceed.
So now we are going to do opening statements. Counsel for Justice Carbo, you may begin your opening statement.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, and members of the jury. Shooting stars saw the signs, they ran the risk. I'd first like to begin by introducing you to my client, Justice Carbo. This last May, Mr. Carbo decided to buy a gun from Shooting Star Gun Club. He wanted to feel safe in his crime-ridden city. As a first-time gun owner, he took a safety course at Shooting Star, instructed by Drew Cantrell. But within minutes of taking this course, Mr. Carbo found himself on the floor, bloody, screaming in pain. His instructor, Drew Cantrell, had shot him in the leg. How could this have possibly occurred? As it turns out, Shooting Star saw the signs that Mr. Cantrell is incompetent. They ran the risk, allowed him to teach safety course. I'd like to take you back to the beginning of Mr. Cantrell's career. Back in June of 20, Shooting Star and its owner, Ms. Skylar Coleman, initially hired Mr. Cantrell as a sales clerk. The job was simple. Mr. Cantrell was simply managing the cash register and handling inventory. It was uneventful. Up until May of 2021, when Mr. Cantrell got into an argument with a coworker. In the heat of the moment, Mr. Cantrell took out a gun and pointed it at the other person, the barrel at their chest. Not only did Ms. Coleman fail to fire Mr. Cantrell in that moment, but members of the jury just 3 months later, he was promoted to firearm safety instructor. But even as a newly minted safety instructor, Mr. Cantrell continued to violate the very safety protocol that he was now required to teach. In November of 2021, Mr. Cantrell walked out of the gun range into the shop of the general public with his weapon still loaded. Skylar Coleman saw the signs, and on May 28th, she ran the risk by allowing Mr. Cantrell to teach a safety course to Justice Carbo. You see, while instructing Justice Carbo, Mr. Cantrell placed him to his right and raised his arm to demonstrate how to fire a gun. The two bumped into each other as a result of careless proximity. And Justice Carbo was shot in the leg. Today, we're going to show you that this tragic incident occurred because shooting stars saw the signs. They ran the risk. Members of the jury, we hold the burden of proof in today's case. We will prove by preponderance of the evidence that shooting star negligently hired and retained Drew Cantrell as an employee. And in addition, it violated Imperial law by even entrusting him with a firearm. In order to prove this to you, we're going to show you three things. First, we're going to show you that Drew Cantrell was unfit to be a safety instructor, and shooting star had known or should have known this fact. Second, we're going to show you that the accident with Justice Carbo was foreseeable. It was a direct and proximate cause of Drew Cantrell's carelessness. And finally, we're going to show you that shooting star had known or should have known that even entrusting Mr. Cantrell the firearm created a substantial risk of injury and violated Imperial's responsible firearm sales practices act. You'll prove each of these three things to you by preponderance of the evidence. This means that if today the evidence tips the scales even slightly in Justice Carbo's favor, then you must hold shooting star liable for his injuries. In order to meet this burden, we're going to show you that shooting star saw the signs. Sign number one. Ross Hernandez, a local who frequented the bar within the club, is going to tell you how she watched in horror as Mr. Cantrell pointed a firearm at a coworker. In addition, you'll hear how Ms. Coleman opted for a token reprimand, a talking to, and some words to be filed away on paper, never to be seen again. Sign number two. Drew Cantrell didn't have the necessary qualifications to be an instructor. Now, in a moment, Ms. Shudo is going to get up here and she's going to tell you that Mr. Cantrell had 2 firearm safety certificates. But today, I'm going to call Dr. Morgan Judd to stand, an expert in firearm safety. He's going to tell you that these 2 safety certificates don't change the fact that Skylar Coleman gave Mr. Cantrell no training in firearm handling. Sign number 3. Ross Hernandez will also tell you how in November of 2021, Drew Cantrell walked into the shop with his weapon loaded. You're going to see how Skylar Coleman saw each of these signs, and finally, we're going to show you that she ran the risk. Dr. Morgan Judd will explain that given these 2 incidences and Drew Cantrell's lack of experience, they didn't meet the threshold to be a firearm safety instructor. Yet you'll hear how Shooting Star let them teach a safety course anyways. You'll hear how my client, Justice Carbo, paid the price for that decision. Members of the jury, throughout today's trial, ask yourselves, how could this have happened? Could this have been prevented? The plaintiff is going to show you Shooting Star saw the signs, but they unfortunately ran the risk. Which is why at the end of this trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Pierce, is going to stand right here. And she's going to ask for accountability. She's going to ask you to hold Shooting Star liable.
Counsel Squirrel? Yes, when you're ready.
Again, Your Honor, Brianna Shinto, person Sargon. May it please the court. Members of the jury. Shooting Star Gun Club has been serving the West Pascal community for decades. They've sold thousands of guns and conducted thousands of safety lessons. But not once has there ever been an incident on their range. Not once. Until May 28th of 2022, when the incident involving Justice Carbo occurred. And as you'll learn later in today's trial, what happened on May 28th was a freak accident, not a foreseeable one. Good afternoon, members of the jury. My name is Brianna Shuto, and along with my co-counsel, Shayla Gutta and Grant Shu, we represent the defendant, the Shooting Star Gun Club, in today's proceedings. Now, the plaintiff has charged Shooting Star Gun Club with the negligent hiring of Drew Cantrell and the reckless entrustment of a firearm to Mr. Cantrell. To prove their case, they're gonna have to show you that Shooting Star Gun Club was negligent when they hired Drew Cantrell, and that it was that negligence that caused Justice Carbo to be shot. They won't be able to meet their burden. Because as you'll learn later in today's trial, in order to prove causation, they're gonna have to prove that this incident was foreseeable. That Shooting Star Gun Club should have seen this coming. They won't be able to do that. Now, Drew Cantrell, who is a firearm safety instructor for Shooting Star Gun Club, will tell you that he holds a firearm safety certificate and a firearm instructor certificate. He'll tell you that on May 28th of 2022, Justice Carbo bumped into him. He'll tell you that he gave his students safety gear, that he gave his students specific instructions on where to stand, and nonetheless, Justice Carbo bumped into him. And he'll make it crystal clear. He only pulled the trigger once that day. Members of the jury, Mr. Cantrell's testimony will prove that this was a freak accident. Avery Nguyen is an eyewitness to what happened on May 28th. She'll tell you that she saw Justice Carbo bump into Mr. Cantrell. Her testimony will prove that this wasn't foreseeable. Finally, members of the jury, you'll meet Ms. Coleman. She's the owner of Shooting Star Gun Club, and she hired Mr. Cantrell. She'll tell you Mr. Cantrell was qualified to teach firearm safety, and that he had a reputation of excellence among Shooting Star clientele. Members of the jury, through her testimony, you'll learn that it was not reckless to entrust Drew Cantrell with a firearm. You'll learn that Drew Cantrell had been teaching firearm safety for nearly a year before May 28th, without a single incident. It's simply unreasonable to expect that Shooting Star Gun Club could have known that putting a gun in the hands of Drew Cantrell that day, as they'd done every day before that, would have resulted the way it did. Members of the jury, Skylar Coleman's testimony will prove to you that she couldn't have seen this coming. What happened to Justice Carbo on May 28th was a tragedy. But tragedies must be foreseeable for someone to be held liable. Opposing counsel just got up here and told you to hold someone accountable. We agree that the person accountable should be held accountable. Sometimes, members of the jury, accidents happen. Sometimes, no matter how much they want to put the blame on someone, no one's at fault. Sometimes it's a freak accident, not a foreseeable one. We'll ask that you find Shooting Star Gun Club not liable on both counts. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Okay, counsel for Justice Carbo. We are now gonna transition to your case. Are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please call your first witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Justice Carbo to the stand.
Justice Carbo is. Lawyers, are you ready?
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Good afternoon, my name is Justice Carbo, that's spelled C-A-R-B-O. I'm a Huron native, I was born and raised in West Pasco, to be specific. I'm a teacher at West Pasco Middle School, and for most of my life, I had a huge passion for long distance running and marathons.
Mr. Carbo, why are you here today in court?
Because I was shot in my leg by Shooting Star Gun Club.
Why did you end up going to Shooting Star Gun Club?
It all started with the well-being of my home. Whenever the name Huron was mentioned, all you could think about was beautiful beaches and beautiful weather, but in current times, crime has skyrocketed. I couldn't sleep at night. My car alone was burglarized 3 times, and I was even robbed just in the past year. My sense of safety was stolen, and I needed something to give me that peace of mind. So I decided that owning a firearm for self-defense would give me that peace of mind.
I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Carbo. At the time that you made the decision to purchase a firearm, had you ever handled or used a gun before?
Never even held it.
Given this lack of experience, how did you end up picking Shooting Star?
First, I made a list of what I needed. I needed a place that could sell me the right type of firearm, a place that could teach me how to use it safely, and teach me how to store it properly.
Did you end up reaching out to Shooting Star?
Yes, I did. I had found Shooting Star online and through word of mouth, and so I sent emails trying to figure out what kind of store they were.
How did Shooting Star respond to the emails you sent?
Well, first, I had sent some pretty detailed questions that I feel like any gun owner would want to know. And the answers that I was getting were kind of vague, and they didn't really answer my question.
Mr. Carbo, given that they didn't answer your questions, why did you still end up going to Shooting Star?
I found online and through Yelp reviews and word of mouth again that the owner, Skylar Coleman, was very helpful in person. So I gave them the benefit of the doubt, and I went in on person. Because they're only like a 5-minute car drive away from my house. But I really wish I didn't.
Mr. Carbo, what happened when you ended up going in person?
Well, I walked to the door, I opened it, I went to the counter, I was greeted by Skylar Coleman for an hour. Skylar Coleman was just throwing guns in my face, giving me the sales pitch, trying to make me buy one. And I was trying to get a couple questions, but it didn't really work.
Mr. Carbo, did the sales pitch convince you?
At the end, it did. I decided to purchase a Glock 22 after I was promised the safety course, which is exactly what I was looking for.
Did you end up getting the safety course?
I was supposed to come back on Saturday, May 28th.
Mr. Carbo, what happened on Saturday, May 28th, when you came back into the shop?
I walked in, I approached the counter and I was told that I need to sign a few forms. And then they were ready to hand over my firearm that was on display. And then I had to remind Skylar Coleman that I had a safety course.
What did Skylar Coleman say after you reminded them?
They said, "Oh, right." And then they introduced me to who's supposed to be my safety instructor. You can't trust.
How did Drew Cantrell start your lesson?
Well, first, he introduced me to Nick Allred, someone who's supposed to be taking the same course as me. And then we walked into the firing range, and then we huddled around stall out.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm going to show the witness what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 2G for identification. Let the record reflect that my co-counsel is currently screen sharing that exhibit. Mr. Carbo and members of the jury, could you let me know when that shows up? Mr. Carbo, could you close that?
We're good.
Mr. Carbo, could you please identify Exhibit 2G for the jury?
So this basically just says where we were standing. You can't throw us the blue X. I'm the red X. To my right is Nick Allred, the yellow X. And this is exactly where you can't placed us.
Mr. Carbo, does the picture itself, as well as the dimensions of these X's, appear to be accurate? Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would like to offer Exhibit 2G into evidence.
Any response?
No objections, Your Honor.
Exhibit 2G will be admitted.
Now, Mr. Carbo, for the sake of the jury, could you explain a little bit more about the location of these X's and which people they represent?
So as I said, can't throw us the blue X. And he positioned me maybe 2 feet away behind me to the right. And Nick Allred farther away to my right.
You mentioned that Drew Cantrell positioned you there. Did you think anything of where you were standing?
Of course not. You can't show the one with the certificate, the one with the experience. He's the expert in this. But he told me to stand, I stand. You see, I'm a teacher. I want my students to listen to me. I want them to respect my instruction. When I'm the student, I respect instruction probably more than anyone in this room. And I end up getting shot.
Just to be clear, Mr. Carbo, once you stood there, did Drew Cantrell do or say anything that indicated you made a mistake?
No.
Mr. Carbo, after you got positioned next to Drew Cantrell, what happened next in terms of the safety lens?
The Drew Cantrell went over a few basic practices I feel every gun owner would know. It was never to point the gun at another person and how to aim at the things on the top of the gun. But I felt lacked a couple key principles, but I didn't really know.
Objection, Your Honor, lack of personal knowledge. Any response?
Your Honor, this is simply a rationally based perception. Although this witness is a gun novice, there's a general understanding among the population of the different aspects of safe gun use. And this witness is just testifying that he didn't think they were all covered.
Any response?
Your Honor, the counsel has made it clear throughout this direct examination that this witness has never owned a gun before, never used a gun before, and knows nothing about guns whatsoever. Thus testifying that Drew Cantrell lacked a few important principles in that demonstration is far beyond what this witness could reasonably know, and is not anything that they could have perceived in that one lesson.
Objection sustained.
Motion to strike the testimony given.
Motion, thank you.
Mr. Carbo, could you simply specify which things were discussed by Drew Cantrell at that point?
How to point the firearm and how to aim it down range. That's really good.
What happened next after Drew Cantrell told you these things?
That's the moment everything fell apart. Drew Cantrell had aimed the firearm and he told us that he's going to fire the first shot. I watched and the first shot was off and then he flinched or something and then he bumped into me. Next thing I know, the gun's pointed at me. Then I just feel my leg go numb.
Mr. Carbo, do you know why your leg went numb?
God,
Thank you, Mr. Carbo. Now, I'd like to just ask you a couple more questions about the lesson that led up to your injury. To the best of your knowledge, do you recall Drew Cantrell mentioning any technical specifics about the Glock 22 handgun?
oh my God.
And finally, to the best of your knowledge, do you recall if Drew Cantrell ever mentioned that this gun had a light trigger?
That doesn't sound familiar.
Your Honor, at this time, I have no further questions.
I believe that's examined.
Yes, Your Honor.
Right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Carbo. I'd like to talk about some statements you just made on direct examination. You just testified that when you showed up to Shooting Star Gun Club on May 14th, for an hour, Skylar Coleman was just throwing guns in my face, trying to get me to buy a gun. Is that right?
It's giving me another sales pitch.
You were deposed in today's case.
Yes, I was.
That deposition was sworn.
Yes,
You were truthful and accurate.
of course.
I'm showing opposing counsel. May the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel Justice Carbo's that deposition.
Yes.
Permission to approach, Your Honor? For the record, I'm referring to page 4, line 65. Please read alongside of me as I read aloud. Question: what did you think of Coleman when you visited in person? Answer: exactly the opposite of what I thought after emailing with them. Coleman personally spent over an hour with me, describing safe gun handling and storage, making recommendations about firearms for self-defense, and explaining the paperwork I'd need to complete to legally own a gun. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah.
So I'd like to be clear. During that hour, Miss Coleman wasn't just throwing guns at you.
Yes, they briefly went over a few basic principles that everyone would need to know. They didn't teach me how to store it. They didn't teach me principles. They briefly described them. And as you just read, over an hour they spent throwing guns in my face.
Mr. Carver, that's not what I'm asking. You told Miss Coleman you were a gun novice, isn't that right?
Of course.
And Miss
Right,
Coleman
make that
then, excuse me. Miss Coleman then explained safe gun handling and storage practices.
How they described it. They briefly went over it.
I'd like to be clear, this wasn't the firearm safety lesson.
No,
This was the first time you were meeting Miss Coleman in person. You didn't ask for having a firearm safety lesson right at this moment.
dying to help, but I did have to end up asking.
And I'm not asking whether you were ending up asking for it. You weren't asking for a firearm safety lesson right now.
Not at this very moment, but
That
I
wasn't-
did.
Excuse me, Mr. Carver, would you like to finish your answer?
Thought.
That wasn't what this was meant to be.
Not in that very, no,
And Miss Coleman wasn't just throwing guns at you.
right, they briefly went over a few principles. That's it.
She also discussed the paperwork you'd need to fill out to purchase a gun.
They briefly described it, but no one went over the paperwork.
But you also testified that during the safety lesson, all Miss Cantrell told you, Mr. Cantrell told you was how to fire and how to point the gun down. Do I have that right?
Sounds familiar.
All right, well, let's go back to your deposition. Permission to approach your own. For the record, I'm referring to page 7, line 155 of the deposition. Please read along silently as I read aloud. Question: how did the gun safety course start? Answer: Cantrell took us to stall 11 and started with a discussion of some basic rules. Don't put your finger on the trigger before you're ready to shoot. Treat every gun as if it's loaded. Never point the gun at another person unless you intend to shoot them. Now referring to block page 8, line 161. How was Mr. Cantrell demonstrating those safety? Answer, they used my gun to show us. When they said, don't put your finger on the trigger, they kept their index finger straight and outside the little metal ring that surrounds the trigger so it didn't touch the trigger at all. When they said, treat every gun as if it's loaded, they slid out the little drawer that holds the bolts to show that it was loaded. And when they said, never point the gun at another person, they pointed the barrel of the gun down at the ground and away from me and Allred. Did I read that correctly?
Pretty much said that whole thing.
So, Mr. Carbo, I have it right when I say Mr. Cantrell talked about more than just how to fire the gun and point it downward.
A little bit more, yes.
Now, I'd also like to talk about what happened after. Mr. Carbo, you've developed some pretty strong views on guns. You started a nonprofit.
I did. I'm the leader and founder of a nonprofit organization that stands to ban semi-automatic firearms. Firearms are a deterrent. I'm a survivor and a victim. It's not fair for anyone to have to go through what I went through and others.
Mr. Carbo, yes or no, you're advocating for a ban on semi-automatic firearms.
Yeah.
You also brought lawsuits against both Mr. Cantrell and Shooting Star Gun.
I have.
Objection, relevance.
Cases.
Your Honor, the lawsuits described occurred after everything that happened in this case leading up to the negligent hiring. And since it occurred after, it can't possibly make a fact of consequence more or less likely as required for relevant testimony.
Any reply?
This goes to bias, Your Honor.
Any final response?
Your Honor, we already know that this is a civil lawsuit. This does not give us a substantial additional bias in this case.
Your Honor, may I be heard? Your Honor, may I invite the court's attention to stipulation 2? Yes. I can read it aloud. It is. Stipulation 2, the last sentence reads, nor may a party strategically stipulate to an element of a cause of action in order to object to the relevance of evidence about that element. Opposing counsels can't simply claim we know Justice Carbo is biased, so that we are not allowed to inquire about the bias of Justice Carbo.
Your Honor, may I be heard? Your Honor, that's not what I'm doing. Clearly, we are in a civil lawsuit. That's all I'm saying.
Objection sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Carbo, you were asked why you're here today. You said, I'm here today because I intend to take every last penny from Shooting Star. Isn't that right?
Shooting Star took something huge from me. My lifelong passion was stripped away. because
Objection,
I-
Your Honor, no response.
Objection sustained.
Motion to strike.
Motion to strike granted.
Mr. Carbo, yes, sir.
Yes.
You intend to take every last penny from Shooting Star if it is the last thing you do.
It is. I did say that.
And that's why you're bringing that lawsuit today. Thank you.
Shooting Star took my biggest passion away from me. I can't run because I wanted to be able to sleep at night.
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive.
Sustained.
Motion to strike. Mr. Carbo, I'd like a yes or no.
Yes.
It is your goal. You brought this lawsuit today because it is your goal to take every last penny from Shooting Star if it's the last thing you do.
It is.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have nothing.
And we do that.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Carbo, cross-examination inquired about the information that Skylar Coleman provided to you, specifically relating to storing the firearm. Did Skylar Coleman answer all of your questions? Now, cross-examination also mentioned the procedures. Are you well-versed in firearm procedures enough to understand everything that was going on?
No.
Your Honor, at this time, I have no further questions.
And we do that.
No reclass, Your Honor.
Is this witness, is everyone done with this witness?
Yes, Your Honor. May my witness be excused?
Yes, and it is true. And my understanding, you are a guest witness, or if you have to leave, you will be. It's okay. Thank you. Rose, will you let me know when you're done? Are you ready for your second?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff called Ross Hernandez. Good afternoon, Ms. Hernandez.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Of course, my name is Ross Hernandez, and I'm from West Pascal.
What do you do for a living?
I'm so glad you asked. I was known to handmade jewelry business called Handmade Moments. This actually jewelry I'm wearing is made by me, but this one in particular is one of my best sellers. I sold like 6 of them.
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. I'll have to check out your business. But I'd like to direct your attention to today's case. Are you familiar with Shooting Star Gun Club?
Yes, I am. It's located in the same strip mall that Handmade Moments.
Have you ever been to Shooting Star?
Oh yeah, I go there all the time, like 4 or 5 times a week. But I don't shoot any guns.
Why would you go to Shooting Star if you've never shot any guns?
I have this bar slash cafe called Trinity Taverns.
Objection, Your Honor, all packages prohibited.
Your Honor, Ms. Hernandez is simply stating how she knows Shooting Star and how she's familiar. She goes to the bar and cafe that is in Shooting Star, and therefore this goes to foundation.
Your Honor, we've already established that this witness goes to Shooting Star. The mention of the bar in this case brings off an extreme prejudicial effect when relating to Shooting Star of gun department.
Ms. Hernandez, do you remember my question?
Could you ask it again, please?
Yes. Why would you go to Shooting Star?
Well, they have this bar slash cafe called Trinity Taverns, and it's great. It's great for those days when I don't feel like driving to go get lunch and I just have a cup of coffee or a drink. The atmosphere is just wonderful, and I've met some of my closest friends there.
Are you familiar with one of Shooting Star's employees, Drew Cantrell?
Unfortunately, I am. Every time I see Drew Cantrell there, I always try to avoid it.
Ms. Hernandez, why would you try to avoid Mr. Cantrell?
I would always see him just being careless with guns, and honestly, I don't want to be around that kind of negative energy.
About how many times would you say that you personally saw Mr. Cantrell acting careless?
That'd be about 2 times.
When was the first time that you noticed this?
The first time was in May of 2021. It was an argument.
What makes you say it was an argument?
Well, I was passing through the shop on my way to go meet up with my blind date, who I actually kind of wish didn't show up, but that's beside the point. There's some racket going on behind me, so I turn around and Drew Cantrell just yelling at another employee.
What happened as Mr. Cantrell was yelling at this employee?
Well, at first he had a gun down by his side, and then out of nowhere he just took it and pointed it directly at the other person. I mean, I honestly thought I was going to watch someone get shot right in front of my eyes. It was pretty scary.
Mr. Hernandez, what happened after Mr. Cantrell pointed the gun at the other employee?
The entire room just went silent. And then Skylar Coleman, the owner, ran in and saw what was going on and yelled at Drew, "Would you ever point a gun at another person in my shop?"
When was the second time that you noticed Mr. Cantrell acting careless?
The second time was in November of 2021.
What did you notice this time?
This time I was going to go talk to Skylar about my upcoming vacation, utilizing my time here in Florida. So I went to go talk to her where she would, normally be during the day in her office, and that's when I heard her just yelling at Drew Cantrell.
What did you hear her yelling about?
It was something about how he had left the gun loaded and brought it into the shop. I've got to say, that's a red flag. And I know a thing or two about men with red flags.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez.
Relevance.
Your Honor, this witness was simply just stating her opinion about what she had overheard. It has no bearing on the actual facts of this case. It was just her opinion. And she already stated that she didn't believe that what she had overheard Mr. Cantrell doing was right.
Motion to strike.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Mendez.
Good afternoon.
I'd first like to discuss how you prepared your testimony in today's case. One of the opposing lawyers gave you strict instructions on what to put in your affidavit, is that right?
That's right.
In fact, they showed you an exhibit you'd never seen before,
That sounds about right, yeah.
directing your attention to what's been marked for identification as Exhibit 20 in the binder in front of you. Please let me know when you get there.
So, here's the list on that is the result.
Yes.
This is the exhibit they showed you.
Yes, I believe so.
Is it a fair and accurate depiction of that exhibit?
Yes.
At this time, the defense offers Exhibit 20.
No objections, Your Honor.
Now, that lawyer also told you to include everything you know about Drew Cantrell.
Yes.
I'd like to talk about Mr. Cantrell. You don't like him.
No, I don't.
In fact, you think he's smug
That's right.
and arrogant.
Yes,
He's the one person at Shooting Star you just can't stand.
that's correct.
And as you mentioned on direct, you try to avoid him at all times.
Definitely.
I'd like to talk to you about some of the incidents you mentioned on direct. You saw Drew Cantrell point a gun at someone on May. You saw Drew Cantrell point a gun at someone in May,
Yes.
and you say that Miss Coleman was there at the time.
Yes, she came in after, I think she probably heard what was going on.
Miss Coleman took that incident pretty seriously, didn't she?
Yes, I mean, she definitely should have. Drew pointed a gun at another person.
She took Mr. Cantrell into the back office,
Yes,
and when she returned later, she came out with a pad and pen.
yes, she did.
She asked you about what you saw,
Yes,
and she took notes while you were talking.
she did.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
No redirect, Your Honor. May my witness be excused?
So the plaintiff, do you have any more witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Dr. Morgan Judd to stand.
Good, please let me know when you're watching the podium, please let me know when you're coming with me.
I just need one more sec. You guys. You can go. You can go. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Judd.
Good afternoon.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Of course. My name is Morgan Judd. Most people know me as Dr. Judd, the firearms safety expert. Although not the type you would find in Cindy Amber's film. Rust, you see.
Please tell us about your education.
Of course. So I grew up in a small town in the city in Hunan, and I've always wanted a higher education in the United States. So that's why I decided to pursue a PhD in public policy, as well as a master's degree in statistics from Auburn University.
Do you have any professional experience dealing with firearms?
I've worked a little under a decade at the United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, where I received extensive training on how to track criminals traffic illegal firearms. I've also testified multiple times in front of state legislatures regarding gun violence.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would like to tender Dr. Morgan Judd as an expert in firearm safety in accordance with stipulation 12.
No objection to it. Doctor will be, identified as.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Judd, do you have an opinion about Drew Cantrell's qualifications to be a firearm safety instructor?
I do.
What evidence did you rely on to form this opinion?
I looked at the deposition of Skylar Quinn and Justice Carbo, the affidavit of Drew Cantrell, with all read and Amy Wen, including exhibits 1 through 23.
What methodology did you use in your analysis?
I used a comparison of Drew Cantrell's action during his career at Shooting Star versus the bare minimum firearm safety standards adopted in my field, as well as Shooting Star Gun Club.
Dr. Judd, what is your opinion about Mr. Cantrell's qualifications?
In my expert opinion, Drew Cantrell is unqualified to teach that firearm safety course on May 28th, 2022.
I'd like to direct your attention to Drew Cantrell's promotion to firearm safety instructor. Now, to your knowledge, was there any benefit to Skylar Coleman in promoting Mr. Cantrell rather than hiring an outsider to the company?
There is. In the words of Ms. Coleman, Drew Cantrell is good for the checkbooks.
What should be the process for entrusting a firearm to somebody?
According to Imperium's Responsible Firearms Sales Practices Act, the seller of the gun should look at a user's maturity, firearm experience, prior crime, character trait as a safe and law-abiding person, and whether or not they serve as a physical or verbal threat to society before they sell or entrust a firearm to someone.
To your knowledge, did Ms. Coleman ask about each of these traits before entrusting Mr. Cantrell with a firearm?
No, she did not. In the interview she had with Mr. Cantrell, she missed the essential trait of character as a safe and law-abiding person and prior crime.
What experience does Mr. Cantrell have dealing with firearms?
Now, prior to working at Shooting Star, Mr. Cantrell's experience was solely limited to that of hunting. And even working at Shooting Star, he only earned 2 certificates.
Could you please explain for us what these 2 certificates mean?
Of course, these 2 certificates work like a driver's license. Just like a driver's license is not going to stop a high schooler from breaking any traffic laws, these 2 certificates will not stop Drew Cantrell from breaking safety rules either regarding guns.
Did Skylar Coleman give Mr. Cantrell any hands-on training in firearms?
To my knowledge, no.
Did Shooting Star have any rules about how to firearms while at the gun range?
They do. They have a list of 9 gun range safety rules posted right next to their gun range.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to screen share what has been marked as Exhibit 8. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Judd, are you able to see that exhibit?
Yes.
Members of the jury,
We are.
Your Honor, opposing counsel. Dr. Judd, can you please identify this exhibit?
Of course. This is a copy of the gun range safety rules that Shooting Star have.
How is it that you recognize this exhibit?
I analyzed it during the 36 hours I've spent working on this case.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of what you've analyzed?
To my knowledge, yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would like to offer Exhibit 8 and 7. No objections, Your Honor. Dr. Judd, to your knowledge, did Mr. Cantrell follow all of these safety rules while employed at Shooting Star?
He did not. He broke 3 of these rules on 3 separate occasions.
What was the first?
The first rule is only point at it if you want it destroyed.
And how is this rule violated?
He violated this rule in May of 2021 when he pointed a firearm at another coworker during a heated dispute.
What was the second rule?
The second rule is, if it's loaded, keep it on the lines. That means that loaded firearms should always be kept within the gun range and not be used about in the shop.
How did Drew Cantrell break this second rule?
He broke this rule only 3 months after his promotion to the gun safety instructor. In November of 2021, he brought a loaded Glock 22 into the gun shop and set it right on the sales counter.
Dr. Judd, what is the final rule?
The final rule is, be aware of your surroundings and beyond.
And how is this rule violated?
He violated this rule on May 28th, 2022, when he instructed Drew, apologies, Justice Tarbo and Nick Allred to stand in close proximity to him. In that action, it shows that he was not aware of his surroundings and he shot the Glock 22 for demonstration purposes.
Are there any post repercussions for breaking one of these rules?
There is. If we look at the bottom of this sign, it states that failure to abide by the above rules and result in removal from the facility or denial of any future shooting privileges.
Thank you. Okay, we can take down the exhibit. Dr. Judd, to your knowledge, what was Ms. Coleman's reaction when Drew Cantrell broke multiple of these safety rules?
Ms. Coleman didn't even apply Shooting Star's own safety repercussions. He didn't remove Drew Cantrell from the facility, nor did she deny him of any future shooting privileges. What she did was talking to him and writing him up on the company record. That was it. Ms. Coleman saw their own sign of safety rules, yet she ran the risk on May 28th of 2022 by appointing Drew Cantrell as the safety instructor that day.
No further questions, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Judd.
Good afternoon.
I want to start by talking a little bit about your background in firearm safety policy. You're an advocate for gun control laws, right?
Of course, only if they're reasonable.
You contributed to the Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act,
I did.
and you're a regular contributor to MSNBC News.
Yes, including Imperion Times.
I want to be clear. You're being paid over $20,000 for your work on today's case.
That's right. It's what you get for a PhD.
Now, let's talk about May 28th. You weren't at the range that day, right?
I was not. I only reviewed eyewitness accounts.
Exactly. And you'd agree with me, Dr. Judd, in saying that the accounts of those eyewitnesses have discrepancies.
Yes,
Some of them say that Mr. Corbo did not move prior to the first shot being fired.
that's right. It's about a 50-50 split.
Some of them say that Mr. Corbo did when the first shot was fired.
That's right.
Some of them say Mr. Cantrell did not flinch prior to firing the first shot.
Yes,
Dr. Judd, only one of them says that Mr. Cantrell did flinch.
that's right.
I'd like to be clear, Mr. Cantrell specifically states he only pulled the trigger once during that lesson, right?
I believe so. The gun was fired twice, though.
But I'd like to be clear, Dr. Judd, none of the other eyewitnesses dispute that.
I don't believe there's specific mention about pulling the trigger. No.
And all of those eyewitnesses report hearing the two gunshots less than a second apart.
That's right.
Let's talk about the history of Shooting Star Gun Club. Skylar Coleman took ownership of the place in 2008,
Yes, she did.
and prior to May 28th, no one had ever been injured at Shooting Star Gun Club.
No, from 2005 and 2007, there was a few customers forcing around the guns, and that caused them to be injured by the recoil.
Okay, let's talk about that, Dr. Judd. When Skylar Coleman took ownership of Shooting Star Gun Club, that stopped happening, right?
I believe so.
And prior to May 28th, there had been no accidents on the range at all.
No, there was 2 incidents, not accidents, on May of 2021 and November of 2021.
Let's talk about this. You mentioned on the rec that Skylar Coleman didn't adequately punish Drew Cantrell for these incidents.
I did.
You said that Skylar Coleman simply talked to Drew Cantrell.
I did. More specifically, it was some sort of yelling and screaming.
Dr. Judd, you're aware that Skylar Coleman took the time to review the rules with Drew Cantrell?
I'm not sure about taking the time. She did explain the rules.
Dr. Judd, is that a yes to my question? Skylar Coleman took the time to review the rules with Drew Cantrell.
That's a no. She only reviewed several rules, not all of them.
Dr. Judd, that wasn't my question. She reviewed the rules that Drew Cantrell wrote with Mr. Cantrell.
Only the ones she wrote. Yes.
I want to talk about the entrustment of the gun to Drew Cantrell. You said on direct that Drew Cantrell was unfit to be entrusted with a gun.
I did.
I want to direct your attention to the responsible firearms sales practice exam. Now, Drew Cantrell met the requirement that he didn't have a history of poor mental health.
Not for mental health. No.
And he didn't have a history of, he had a history of firearm knowledge with the correct certifications.
Yes, but it was insufficient.
That wasn't my question. He had certifications regarding firearm safety.
Only limited ones. Yes.
Dr. Judd, he has 2 certifications for that.
That's right.
One of those specifically qualifies him to instruct firearm safety.
I'm not sure about the instructor certificate.
Is there testimony today that Drew Cantrell doesn't have an instructor certificate?
No, I'm not sure what the instructor certificate means since I don't have one personally.
Dr. Judd, he has a firearm safety instructor certificate.
He does.
This was issued to him by the state of Imperial.
That's right.
So he meets that qualification under the Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act.
He does not.
Dr. Judd, he's been working with guns since retirement.
Partially and mostly unprofessionally. His professional experience was fairly limited.
He had 2 certifications.
Yes, as I said earlier.
And it's your testimony today that he, based on his certifications and experience, he was still unfit to be entrusted with a firearm.
It is.
Let's talk about another aspect of the act. He has no affiliation, membership, or other association with organizations publicly classified by the United States Terrorist Organization.
He does not.
He meets all of those requirements.
He does not. You have a prior criminal history of 3 misdemeanors.
Dr. Judd, I'm not asking about that. He meets all of those requirements that I just mentioned.
No, he does not meet the requirement firearm experience.
Dr. Judd, he meets several requirements of the Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act.
Only a limited amount.
Dr. Judd, the Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act is a totality of the circumstances act, right?
That's right.
Let's talk more about his experience. He'd been working at Shooting Star Gun Club for 2 years prior to May 28th.
Yes.
He'd been handling guns daily during that time.
I cannot speak to his time as a sales clerk, but as a firearm instructor, I would say approximately daily.
Was that a yes to my question? He'd been handling guns daily during his employment at Shooting Star?
Only as a firearm instructor, yes.
Dr. Judd, you mentioned Exhibit 8. It's on the record. Let's talk about that. To your knowledge, Drew Cantrell had only violated these rules twice.
No, he violated another rule on May 28th of 2023.
Dr. Judd, prior to May 28th, Drew Cantrell had only violated these rules twice.
No, if you can hand me exhibit 8, I can explain that he violated more than just those 2 rules.
Dr. Judd, if you could turn to exhibit 8 and invite her in front of you. I'll go over it with you. The first one says, treat every gun as if it's loaded and dangerous. To your knowledge, Drew Cantrell only violated this rule once.
No, you violated this rule twice. Once on May 21, 2021, and once on May 28.
Dr. Judd, is your testimony today that Drew Cantrell violated this rule on May 28th?
Yes, he shot Justice Carbo. That is not treating every gun as if it is loaded.
Dr. Judd, I want to be clear, that wasn't intentional, right?
It was not intentional.
So prior to May 28th, he only violated this rule once.
Yes.
He only violated the second rule once. Prior
No.
to May 28th.
Prior to May 28th, yes.
And he never violated the first rule.
No, he violated this 3rd rule on May 28th, when the trigger was compressed twice.
Dr. Judd, I want to be clear, there is no testimony today that he pulled the trigger twice.
No,
None of the eyewitnesses you reviewed say that he pulled the trigger twice.
not to my knowledge. The gun fired twice.
To your knowledge, he never violated the 4th rule. Be safe.
Absolutely wrong. You violated this rule on 3 separate occasions.
Dr. Judd, let me read this rule for you. It says, keep the safety on position and the action door open until you're ready to fire. He never violated that rule.
Apologies, but on May 28th of 2022, there was no eyewitness testimony to testify that he ever used the safety on the gun.
Dr. Judd, to your knowledge, he never violated this rule. Do I have that right?
No,
Dr. Judd, there was no eyewitness testimony saying that he did violate this rule.
exactly. I cannot confirm if this rule is violated or not, so I cannot explicitly say yes.
But Dr. Judd, I'm asking, to your knowledge, he never violated that rule.
No, I have found no confirmation to say that he did not violate this rule.
You have no confirmation to say that he did.
That's right.
He never violated the. Pardon me, he only violated that rule once.
Yes,
That 6th rule he never violated.
I'm not sure if he wore any eye protection or ear protection on May 28th. He only provided that to Justice Carbo and Nick Allred.
Thank you, Your Honor, I have no further questions. Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Judd, I would just like to clear some things up. On cross-examination, we heard about the Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act. Now, just to clarify, in order to meet that standard, does someone need to meet some of the qualifications or all of them, just to clear the state?
A person must meet the majority of the qualifications. However, Drew Cantrell only met a tiny bit, if not the minority of the qualifications.
I would also like to clear up some things about Exhibit 8 and the gun safety rules. The repercussions posted at the bottom, does it state how many times someone has to violate these rules?
It does not.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Dr. Judd, you just testified that someone has to meet the majority of the requirements of the Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act.
Yes, that is to my knowledge, since I advocated for this law myself.
Dr. Judd, you're aware that the Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act is a totality of the circumstances test.
That's right. That's why you have to meet the majority of the following fitness goals.
Dr. Judd, in a totality of the circumstances test, you don't have to meet the majority of the requirements.
No, that is wrong.
There's no specific number listed in the Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act.
It doesn't specify. However, the totality of the circumstances requires the majority.
Objection, improper expert opinion.
Yes, Your Honor. Pursuant to Rule 702, this witness can testify to the responsible firearm sales practices actually for testimony today that they even advocated for in the legislature, and they are stipulated as an expert in firearm safety pursuant to stipulation 12.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Judd is an expert in firearm safety, and she just testified that she's not an expert in public hearing policy and is not aware of the specifics of the Responsible Firearm Sales Practices Act. She can't testify to totality of the circumstances. Motion to strike, Your Honor. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
No redirect, Your Honor. May my witness be excused? Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff rests.
And before we proceed with the defense case, does anyone need to vote?
Your Honor, the plaintiff would request a 5-minute recess. The defense has no objection to that.
And we put the second one.
Yeah. It's the big one. You know what it is? Yeah.
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
You're the lady, right?
Yep.
And 10 people.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, now time for the, shooting star position, and you ready, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Drew Cantrell to witness stand. May I proceed?
Are you ready, counsel?
Good afternoon, Mr. Cantrell.
Hi, man.
Please state your full name, spelling your last for the record.
My name is Drew Cantrell, spelled Cantrell.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Cantrell?
Well, currently I work down at Shooting Star as a safety instructor.
What's a safety instructor?
Well, I teach all the people new to this hobby how to handle these tools called guns. Show them how to load, fire, around, all the normal safety expectations.
Mr. Cantrell, why are you here today?
I was involved in a shoot incident on May 28th.
I want to talk about your history or your time at Shooting Star Gun Club. When did you first start working?
Well, I actually first started working here in June 2020 at the start of the pandemic. I was a sales clerk, managing inventory. I had previous experience with it at my job down at Imperial Motors.
Prior to being hired as a sales clerk, did you have any experience with firearms specifically?
Of course, I've been hunting in Imperial my entire life with my father. I've grown up around guns my entire life.
When you were first hired, did you need any firearms qualifications?
I managed the inventory, but I did get a firearm safety certificate, just so it's even more safe.
Did you ever change jobs at Shooting Star Gun Club?
Yes, I was promoted to a firearm safety instructor.
As a firearm safety instructor, did you need any firearms certifications?
Yes, when I originally asked for the job, Coleman, he told me I needed to get more certification in the form of a firearm safety instructor certificate.
Now, you mentioned a firearm safety certificate earlier. If you could turn to Exhibit 19 in the binder in front of you.
I'm there, ma'am.
Do you recognize this?
Yeah, it's my firearm safety certificate.
Is it a fair and accurate depiction of your firearm safety certificate?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Your Honor, the defense moves Exhibit 19 into evidence.
No objections, Your Honor.
Now, you mentioned two certificates. When did you obtain both of these?
Well, I obtained this one in November of 2020, and the second one in August of 2021.
Mr. Cantrell, there's been testimony today that you were reprimanded twice while working at Shooting Star Gun Club. Is this true?
Yes, ma'am, it is. I've had two separate infractions, both separated by a large period of time. The first one in November of 2021 wasn't really my fault, but Coleman wanted to err on the safe side, so he reprimanded me anyways.
I'm turning your attention to what's been marked for identification, or what's been pre-admitted as Exhibit 20 in the binder in front of you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize this?
Yes, I do. It's the memorandum issued to me in November for my actions in May.
Now, you mentioned that Skylar Coleman reprimanded you. What specifically did they do to reprimand you?
Well, in November, they reprimanded me by giving me a harsh yelling, refresher of the rules, and a general long talking to about the consequences of my actions. In May, it was a lot more formal, with a second black mark going on my record, and this official memorandum telling me that this was my second strike. And if I had a third one, well, I'd be fired.
Mr. Cantrell, I want to talk about the shooting lesson when your student was shot. What day was that?
Well, that was May 20th.
Well, how many students were you working with that day?
Well, I was really only working with two. Nick Allred and Justice Carter. Avery Nugent was also, of course, in the range.
What kind of gun were you working with that day, Mr. Cantrell?
We were working with Carbo's newly purchased Glock 22s.
Had you ever worked with a Glock 22 before?
Yeah, of course. A great beginner weapon. Worked plenty of different serials of it. Pretty normal.
How did you start the lesson?
Well, I started by issuing them the bog standard personal protective equipment. Earplugs, goggles, the works. Then I explained to them the normal rules of gun safety. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Never keep your gun unloaded until you're ready to fire. Never point at something if you don't want it completely eviscerated. You know, the works. Then I showed them how to load the firearm, chamber around, and aim.
Mr. Cantrell, did you ever shoot the firearm?
Yes, sir. I pulled the trigger once in order to show them how to fire the hand.
What happened when you fired it?
Well, after that first shot, I reckon that someone must have flinched, because the first shot, along with the weird recoil it had, unlike anything I ever experienced, I felt a bump on my right arm from Carbo's left arm. Now I've had told them to stand clear of me, stall to my right, but I guess Carbo must have moved closer, and since he's new and jumped at the loud bang, he would have hit me right on the arm, amplifying the negative effects from the recoil even further, where I can keep hold of the gun no more.
Mr. Cantrell, did you flinch?
No, I never flinched.
I want to be clear. How many times did you pull the trigger that day?
I pulled that trigger once.
How many firearm safety lessons had you conducted prior to May 28th?
Easily hundreds.
Had anything ever gone wrong before?
No, there was only one independent factor that day from my normal lessons.
What was that factor?
Well, it was Justice Carbo.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Cross-examination, Your Honor. Mr. Cantrell, on direct examination, you admitted fault having 2 infractions with your time at Shooting Star.
Yes, sir. The first one in November was when I was inspecting firearm. Part of my common role as a sales clerk. And Coleman came running up to me, yelling at me to never point a firearm at another person. From my perspective, I was pointing it down at the shop floor with my finger nowhere near the trigger. But I guess Coleman saw different, wanted to be safe, reprimanded me anyways. The second one.
Mr. Cantrell, my question was not about what the infraction was. I simply asked if you admitted having 2 infractions, correct?
Yes, sir. They were stupid mistakes, at least the one in May, made with a large period of time between them, and far from May 20th.
Stupid mistakes that were rule violation of the Shooting Star gun code?
The second one was a rule violation that was swiftly reprimanded by Coleman. The first one in November was simply a misunderstanding that Coleman still chose to err on the side of caution.
So with the notion that Mr. Coleman errs on the side of caution, they still marked these down as two separate rule violations.
Yes, they did. Coleman's a cautious man and he prioritizes safety.
Now, let's talk about the actual day of the incident. You never actually inspected the block 22 that was used that day.
No, sir, it was purchased immediately after, I guess it was a freak accident that it had the recoil that it just had.
Co-counsel will now be screen sharing exhibit 8, which has been previously entered into evidence. Mr. Cantrell, are you able to see this?
Yes, sir.
Now, these are the official gun range safety rules that you keep, correct?
They follow them with my heart of hearts.
You follow them to the greatest extent possible.
Yes, sir. Make sure to be as safe as possible. That's what home you want.
Read silently as I read aloud, and if afterwards, the 7th bullet point down says, check your weapon. Always make sure your weapon is functioning correctly, properly cleaned, and safe to use. Did I read that right?
Yes, sir.
And you just admitted to never inspecting the Block 22 before firing it in a training session.
Well, sir, of course, check the round, chamber the gun, all the normal things you do when handling a firearm. I guess on that day, the recoil was freak accident amplified by Coleman's.
Mr. Cantrell, that was not my question. My question was before the training incident itself, before the recoil, you never inspected the Block 22.
No, sir.
And so you did not follow the gun safety rules to a T.
No, but normally it would have caused no issue if Coleman hadn't been standing close to me.
You just stated that the gun had free recoil of its own, correct?
Yes, sir. Normally it wouldn't be an issue because I'd easily be able to brace, but since Coleman was behind me, most likely jumped at the loud bang. He banged into me, causing the gun to fall out of my hands, and then fired the second shot.
Mr. Cantrell, yes or no was flagged. My question was, you would have known that this gun had exceptional recoil if you had simply followed the rules and checked that your weapon was functioning correctly before using it in a training session.
Oh, sir, we can't fire every single gun in our inventory. We stock thousands. But normally it wouldn't have been an issue since that first shot would have been in a safe environment where no one would be standing near them.
Are you telling me, Mr. Cantrell, that even normally then, you wouldn't check your weapons to make sure that it was functioning properly and safe to use?
We check as many weapons as we can check, but no one can check every single weapon in the entire inventory.
Just like how you did not check this weapon on this day.
Well, the first shot would have been checked normally, but since Carbo is standing right next to me, nullified the safety.
So you decided to check this weapon in the actual demonstration to 2 new gun owners?
That's why I instructed them to stand far off. Plus, I knew that there wouldn't be any major malfunction.
Objection non-responsive. Mr. Cantrell, if you could answer with a simple yes or no. Now, in specific regard to your actual qualification, you've never had any formal training for use of your firearm.
I've never had any formal training, but my entire life I've grown up around guns.
You've never been professionally trained on how to teach others how to use firearms?
No, sir, but I've observed countless hours of training at Shooting Star and at other facilities.
Is this your sworn testimony that you sneak countless hours of other trainers?
Yes, sir. When I worked at Shooting Star, our previous instructor, Pat Lorenzen, I watched her work while I was working as my clerk job.
Let me be specific. Beyond just watching coworkers shoot guns, you watched an actual training course.
Yes, sir. Coleman instructed me.
Now, you signed an affidavit before testifying today,
Yes, sir.
and you swore to include all relevant facts.
Yes.
Mr. Cantrell, counsel, if you could screen share the exhibit for a photo.
Your Honor, I'd ask to see the copy of this affidavit.
Oh, apologies. Mr. Cantrell, can you confirm that this is your own sworn affidavit?
Yes, sir.
And this is your signature at the end?
Yes, sir.
Now. Cantrell. You point to me in this affidavit that you wrote yourself, where you say directly that you watched other training courses being performed.
Can't find it, sir. Apologies.
So in your sworn affidavit, of which you said had all truthful and relevant facts, you never said that you ever watched any professional training that used the firearm.
No, sir. I assumed it would be normally known due to my work as a sales.
Mr.
clerk.
Cantrell, that was not my question. My question was, did you include the relevant fact that you had seen any firearm safety instruction in your affidavit, yes or no?
No, sir.
So beyond, in your own words, signing of a few papers, that was all you needed to get both your certificates?
I did do more than sign a few forms for the first one.
Nothing that you included in your affidavit, correct?
No, sir.
So in your sworn affidavit, you say that to get both of these safety certificates, you just had to sign a few more papers.
I say that about the second certificate, sir.
However, in your first safety certificate, you never indicated that you had any prior requirements for it, did you?
No, sir.
And you have a criminal record, correct?
Yes, sir. It was stupid mistakes made several years ago.
Objection, Your Honor, more prejudicial than probative.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. Given CUB Courtroom, character evidence is an essential element of a case when it comes to negligent hiring. And we are using the presence of criminal record to show that a gun was recklessly entrusted to Drew Cantrell by the RFSPA, as well as Drew Cantrell had a general propensity for recklessness, as was submitted in the character form to defense.
Objection number one.
May I be heard?
You may be heard, go ahead.
No, we're not specifically objecting to character evidence. We are objecting to the more prejudicial than probative aspect of this. We have no idea the nature of these convictions, and they do not go to the, they do not go to the proficiency of the safety instructor in this case.
And
They're
your-
traffic violations, they're misdemeanors, and they're 5 to 10 years.
Your Honor, the bar of a piece of evidence being more prejudicial than probative is very low. And given that the two charges today lie directly in negligent hiring, of which a background check was performed, and secondly, the charge of reckless entrustment, the probative value of Drew Cantrell having a criminal record, a factor on the RFSPA, the probative value vastly outweighs the prejudicial value that it may hold.
Objection number one.
Mr. Cantrell, with a yes or a no, I'm not asking about any of the charges. You have a criminal record.
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Coleman never asked you about any of these criminal records.
No, sir. They were 5 to 10 years ago, traffic violations. I do regret them, and I've since learned and haven't committed a single offense since.
Now, Mr. Cantrell, to sum things up, you violated the rules of Shooting Star Gun Club 3 times.
Yes, sir.
The very rules of which you keep.
Yes. They were stupid mistakes in November. I didn't even believe I pointed it at another person, but Coleman still reprimanded me. Err on the side of caution.
Now, you have said something so significant on direct examination that I had to write it down. You had said directly that Skylar Coleman had told you.
I'm not allowed to finish the question.
You had said directly on direct examination that if you had a third rule violation, you would be fired.
Yes, sir.
And you just acknowledged that you did violate the rules 3 times.
The first one was Coleman's perspective that I had violated the rules. The second one was a mistake that I've since learned from. And the third one wasn't even my fault.
You just admitted on cross-examination that you yourself chose not to inspect the gun.
Sir, the first shot was the end of the inspection period. And then Coleman bumping into me simply amplified the mechanical issue in the gun.
So with 3 rule violations, of which you said if the third one happened, you would be fired for, you were still never fired.
Well, the third one wasn't my fault, sir.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Response?
Your Honor, this case directly goes to the negligent hiring and retention of Drew Cantrell, as they testified themselves that Skylar Coleman had told them if the third one had occurred, they'd be fired, and yet they were not, which goes directly to negligent retention of Drew Cantrell.
Reflect.
Yes, Your Honor. They're specifically testifying to the fact that Skylar Coleman did not fire Drew Cantrell after the incident on May 28th. Anything that happened after the incident on May 28th is not relevant to this case.
Objection sustained.
Motion to strike, Your Honor.
Motion to strike, granted.
No further questions, Your Honor.
That would be direct.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Cantrell, you were asked a lot on cross about checking the gun prior to May 28th.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you check a gun without firing it?
Well, you do clear the chamber, sure it's unloaded, showed them how to do that. You check that it's the magazine, showed them how to do that as well. You mainly visually check the gun. You can't really check every single part of it without firing.
And Mr. Cantrell, did you fire the gun before letting your students use it?
Yes, sir, I fired it once.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
No recross, Your Honor.
May the witness be excused.
Your Honor, if the plaintiff would like to request a time check at this time.
Your Honor, may the clerk have a moment?
Yes, they may.
Your Honor, we have the plaintiff at 17 minutes and 10 seconds remaining, and the defense at
20 minutes and 49 seconds for me.
I understand that, it was a good intelligence desperate, and the police was not correct. Okay, that's fine, I was just. The defense will have another witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Avery Nguyen to the witness stand.
Please state your full name, spelling your last for the record.
My name is Avery Nguyen, that's Nguye.
Good afternoon, Ms. Nguyen.
Good afternoon.
What do you do for a living?
I own GWG, Girls with Guns. We supply fine hunting apparel to the high-end boutiques of the East Coast.
Do you have any experience handling firearms?
Absolutely. My mother took me hunting for the first time when I was 7 years old. I've been handling firearms ever since.
Are you familiar with Shooting Star Gun Club?
Certainly.
Shooting Star is where I purchase most of my firearms.
And do you know someone named Skylar Coleman?
I do. I've known Skylar ever since she first took over Shooting Star.
Do you recall when that was?
That was back in 2008.
Well, I'd like to talk about May 28th of 2022. Were you at Shooting Star Gun Club that day?
I was.
When did you arrive?
I was in early. It was about 10 a.m.
Do you recall where you were?
I do. I was at the table behind stall 3 working on one of my files.
And were you, was there anyone else on the gun range with you that day?
Yes. Mr. Cantrell was teaching a safety course at around 11:15 a.m.
Could you see what was happening on that safety course?
I could. At first, it seemed like a normal lesson. I could hear Mr. Cantrell explain all the gun rules, and then I saw him point the gun down.
This one, what happened when Mr. Cantrell pointed the gun down range?
2 shots went on, one after the other. And then I saw the student standing closest to Mr. Cantrell fall to the floor. It was terrifying. I've never seen a person shot before.
Now, I'd like to take this step by step. Did you see any movement from Mr. Cantrell prior to that first shot going off?
No, I never did.
And you said you saw 2 shots go off. Did you see anything happen between them?
I saw the student standing closest to Mr. Cantrell jump and then knock into his arm.
What happened after the student knocked into Mr. Cantrell's arm?
Mr. Cantrell's arm moved, another shot went off, and then I saw the gun fall to the floor.
What's the next thing you remember?
I saw the student just laying on the floor bleeding.
Miss Nguyen, in the 15 years since Skylar Coleman took over Shooting Star Gun Club, are you aware of anything like this happening prior to May 28th?
No. May 28th was the first time I'd ever seen anyone actually get in that Shooting Star.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Nguyen, you're quite fond of Shooting Star, aren't you?
I am. I've been going there for 20 years. It's like a community thing.
And you even have a large collection of firearms, all purchased from Shooting Star.
Exactly. Shooting Star is where I get all my guns.
You mentioned that you've never seen any other incidents like the May 28th one at Shooting Star, didn't you?
Not one where someone had got injured so severely.
But what you didn't mention on direct examination is that you saw the same person who shot Justice Carbo, Drew Cantrell, pointing a firearm at another employee.
That's true. I saw that. About 2.5 years ago, Mr. Cantrell pointed a firearm. Afterwards, I heard Skylar yelling at him.
Ms. Nguyen, just to clarify, you saw this very clearly.
I did.
Now, you also testified about the May 28th incident itself. To be more exact, you testified both about listening to the instruction as well as to seeing what actually happened. Is that right?
Sure.
I'd like to talk about your position while observing these events. Your Honor, at this time, I'm going to show the witness what the marked as plaintiff's exhibit 2G. I believe it's already in evidence. Can you see that exhibit?
I can.
Now, that red X is Drew Cantrell, right?
I believe the red X is Justice Carbo.
My apologies. You can see the X that represents Drew Cantrell in stall 11, right?
That's the blue stall, and they're slightly behind stall. There it is.
Exactly. Now, I'd like to talk about your position from stall 11. You were in stall 3, right?
I was.
Now, that puts you about 30 feet away from stall 11.
Yes, it was about 30 feet.
And between each of these stalls, there was stall partitions, correct?
There is.
And Drew Cantrell was standing just behind this partition.
Yes, Drew was standing behind the partition.
And standing behind that partition, if you were to be holding the gun, it would be outstretched in front of it. Isn't that right?
I suppose.
Ms. Nguyen, To recap, Drew Cantrell was 30 feet away, standing with his arms extended. And that is how you could see the safety vest.
Yes.
And because of these factors, you didn't have a very clear view, did you?
I didn't have the best view, no.
And because you didn't have the best view, you weren't exactly sure what happened, were you?
I'm not exactly sure, but I know what I saw.
So in your own words, you only think that you saw Justice Carbo jump, isn't that right? Your Honor, this is the witness's own statement, and as well, I'm asking about whether or not they thought Justice Carbo was jumping, which doesn't actually elicit a statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel referring to the witness's own statement, as he said, quoting directly from Ms. Nguyen's affidavit. This is a prior statement, but not sworn in at the deposition that is being brought in court for the truth of the matter. That is hearsay.
Ms. Nguyen, in your own words, you only thought that you saw Justice Carbo jump,
Exactly.
and you only thought that Drew Cantrell, his arms extended, you only thought that he didn't make a movement before shooting.
Exactly. I don't think I saw Mr. Cantrell make any movement.
Your Honor, at this time, I have no further questions.
Yes, Your Honor. Would you like me to wait before?
No, when you're ready.
Ms. Nguyen, you were asked about another incident you witnessed on cross-examination. Is it true you saw Mr. Cantrell point a firearm at someone?
It is.
Where did that take place?
This was inside the shop.
Do you know if that firearm was loaded?
I don't believe it was.
And was anyone hurt?
Heavens no.
You were also asked about what you saw on May 28th. Did you have the best view of what was going on?
No, it wasn't the best view, but I can still see what's happening.
Did you testify to anything you aren't really sure about at all?
No, I know what I saw.
You were also asked on cross-examination about whether you liked Shooting Star. Is that true?
Yes, of course I do.
Does that change what you saw on May 28th?
Absolutely not.
Does that at all affect your testimony here today?
No.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Briefly, Your Honor. Ms. Nguyen, although you mentioned that you could see what was going on, you were at the time focusing on modifying one of your firearms, correct?
Sure, I was working on one of my new rifles, but I was...
And because of this, you can only see the incidents out of the corner of your eye.
Exactly.
No further questions, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor. May this witness be excused.
Prior to the seating, may I start a time check on behalf of both parties? I believe the defense is 13 minutes to 38 seconds. Placement of 13 minutes to 38 seconds. And 16 minutes and 41 seconds.
I have the plaintiff at 13 minutes and 40 seconds and the defense at 16 minutes and 40 seconds.
At this time, the defense calls Skylar Holding for this. Good afternoon, Ms. Coleman.
Good afternoon.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the owner and operator of Shooting Star Gun Club in West Pascal.
Why are you in court today, Ms. Coleman?
A former customer of ours
Justice Carbo was shot in a freak accident that occurred on our range on May 28th of 2022.
Was May 28th the first time you met Justice Carbo?
No, I had talked previously with Mr. Carbo about his purchasing of the Glock 22. And he was just coming in on May 28th to make the complimentary safety site off.
Who was teaching the course that day?
One of my firearm instructors, Drew Cantrell.
And how long had Mr. Cantrell been working with Shooting Star?
It must have been about 2 years at that point.
Did you know Mr. Cantrell before he worked at Shooting Star?
I did. He actually came into the shop a couple times before he submitted his application.
Did you originally hire Mr. Cantrell to be a safety instructor?
No, I hired him to be a clerk and manage our inventory.
What did that hiring process look like?
It was quite standard. I had him submit an application and then I interviewed him pertaining to his knowledge and experience relating to guns.
What made him qualified to teach safety courses at Shooting Star?
He'd been working with the club for nearly a year at that point. He'd received his firearms safety certificate, and I was confident in his abilities.
How did the community receive him?
There were great reviews regarding Drew.
Directing your attention to what's marked for identification as Exhibit 14 in the binder in front of you. Please let me know when you get there.
I'm there.
Do you know what this is, Ms. Coleman?
I do. This is Shooting Star's Yelp review page.
And is it a fair and accurate depiction of that Yelp review page?
I'd say so.
The defense offers Exhibit 14.
Yes, Your Honor, as to hearsay.
Your Honor, this is reputation concerning character, a hearsay exception under 803.21.
Your Honor, these are still out-of-court statements being used for the truth of the matter asserted that Drew Cantrell and Shooting Star had positive reviews.
Your Honor, under the exception, a person's reputation among their associates or the community concerning that person's character are allowed as a hearsay exception. We'd be happy to redact other reviews except for that first one, which specifically mentions Drew Cantrell as a safe firearm safety.
We would be okay with the first one being redacted.
Exhibit number 14 will be omitted with everything redacted but number.
Now, Ms. Coleman, would you please read that review aloud for the jury?
Of course. It states, the person teaching the class, Drew Cantrell, took individual time for each student, holding, aiming, safety at all times.
Is that consistent with Mr. Cantrell?
Absolutely.
During his employment at Shooting Star, have you ever had any issues with Drew Cantrell?
I can think of 2 times in particular. I did have to remind Drew of some of the rules around the show.
Directing your attention to what's marked for identification as Exhibit 20. Do you recognize this?
I do. This is the memorandum I filed due to Drew's instance.
Would you please read aloud for the jury the second paragraph of that review?
Of course. It says, Shooting Star holds itself to the highest standards of safety and professionalism as a firearms dealer and training institution. We expect the same of our employees. I would like to reiterate that your actions henceforth are under scrutiny and that further incursion of such acts will be grounds to termination.
Did either of those incidents involve somebody getting hurt?
No, absolutely not.
Did you reprimand Drew?
Yes, this is exactly what I did.
Did you see Mr. Cantrell make those mistakes ever again?
No.
And in the 6 months since you filed that memorandum, have you ever had any issues with Mr. Cantrell?
No.
I'd like to be clear, Ms. Coleman. Were Mr. Cantrell's past actions any indication to you that something like May 28th would ever happen?
Absolutely not. If I thought for even a second that Drew's behavior lead to someone getting shot,
I would have removed him immediately.
Thank you, Ms. Coleman. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Coleman, Drew Cantrell was written up in May of 2021, correct?
Correct. May of 2021 and November.
And for the May incident, this was because you had heard a report that Mr. Cantrell had pointed a gun at another person, right?
Exactly.
And just 3 months later, you promoted Mr. Cantrell.
I did. After those 3 months, I did promote him.
But you had no idea whether Mr. Cantrell had previous instructional experience.
No, that's why I made it a priority for them to attain their firearms safety instructional certificate that would certify them to teach by the Department of Justice, period.
But Ms. Coleman, you never mentioned this instructional certificate in your affidavit or in your deposition, did you?
No, I didn't.
Now, you also never trained Mr. Cantrell for this new position.
I didn't. I assumed the DOJ would do something like that.
And this promotion was good, the checkbook.
Sure, it wasn't bad for our budget, and being a small business owner, that's something I have to take into account.
As you mentioned earlier, Mr. Cantrell was written up again in November of 2021.
Yes, ma'am.
This time for bringing a loaded gun into the shop.
Exactly.
Now, I'd like to discuss May 28th. You had Mr. Cantrell teach Justice Carbo a safety training course that day, correct?
Exactly.
Your Honor, I'd like to refer the witness to what has been marked as plaintiff exhibit 18 for identification. So counsel, if you could please screen share. Ms. Coleman, can you see this document?
I can.
And is this document a fair and accurate representation of the text that you sent to Drew Cantrell on the morning of May 28th?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers exhibit 18 as evidence. Ms. Coleman, you sent this text to Drew Cantrell on Saturday, May 28th, 2022 at 9:30 a.m., correct?
Exactly.
Now, please read along silently as I read your text out loud. Hey, just cashed in on a couple of handgun sales. Both customers are rookie gun owners, so they need to take a safety course. Fully booked in the shop, so I'm having you run this one. I don't want to hear about any of your mistakes again today. Did I read that correct?
You did.
So, Ms. Pullman, you were concerned about Mr. Cantrell's behavior?
Sure. I'm concerned anytime there's newbies involved with guns, such as these two customers have already just.
So this is why you said, I don't want to hear about any of your mistakes again today?
That's right.
Now, Ms. Pullman, you can't say whether Mr. Cantrell was involved in any other workplace incidents before May 28th.
And not regarding any other ones that I didn't write up there.
But even if he was involved in other incidents, that wouldn't have made you remove him as an instructor?
Possibly. If something like that happens again,
Your Honor, this question is not vague, but it comes directly from Ms. Skylar Pullman's deposition.
Submitted for Your Honor.
Sustained. Another question.
Motion to strike if the answer is given.
I think she gave a brief answer, but I will get more.
Ms. Coleman, you said in your sworn deposition that you wouldn't have fired Mr. Cantrell if he was involved in another workplace incident?
necessarily. I would have to look at the totality of the incident.
Your Honor, I'd like to show the witness what has been marked as Skylar Pullman's sworn affidavit for identification.
I'd
Now,
ask that opposing counsel show me before proceeding.
Now, Ms. Coleman, I'd like to direct your attention to the lines 144 to 146. Please read along silently as I read the statement out loud. Or sorry, 142 to 1. Before the incident in May 2022, was Drew Cantrell involved in any other workplace? No clue. If anything happened and it was reported, it would have been written in our company record. That's our policy and routine business practice. But regardless, it wouldn't have made me take Cantrell out of the position as director. Did I read the correctly?
Exactly, ma'am.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Hernandez, you were asked about your decision to promote Drew Cantrell to a firearm safety instructor. Did you make sure Mr. Cantrell received a certificate?
Yes, not only that, but I made sure that they viewed other instructors in the Pascal area. Like I said, confident in Drew's ability.
Did you ever make sure they watched the training and instructors at Shooting Star?
Absolutely.
I'd also like to talk to you about what opposing counsel just showed you. Are you aware of Drew Cantrell's incidents outside of Shooting Star?
No.
Thank you, Ms. Coleman. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
No recross, Your Honor.
May Ms. Coleman return to counsel's table?
Unless you have any more witnesses.
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests.
This time we are going to begin closing argument. And we first to the left, both sides know what time they have left.
I have plaintiff at 8 minutes and 26 seconds and defense at 11 minutes and 47 seconds.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, may I request a 5-minute recess? Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, well, then I see it. I tried to look at it. Okay.
And people, are you ready?
Yes,
Yes.
Your Honor.
Are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
I just counsel, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, after the time is ready, then we're about to let the stage of closing arguments. And the plaintiff, you are going to have an opportunity to go first as well as this time. You have 8 minutes and 22 seconds. How much time would any of you like to reserve?
Your Honor, I request that my remaining time be reserved for rebuttal. I don't want to hear about any of your mistakes again today. Mere moments after Skylar Coleman sent this text to Drew Cantrell, Justice Carbo lay on the floor in a pool of his own blood. Your Honor, opposing counsel, and members of the jury. Shooting stars saw the signs, but they ran the risk. The defendant knew that Drew Cantrell was unfit. And yet, on May 28th, Shooting Star was willing to ignore the danger and send Mr. Carbo out on the shooting range. Drew Cantrell should have never been an instructor. And now, Mr. Carbo is paying the price for that reckless decision. Today, we have proven by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant's Shooting Star Gun Club was negligent in hiring Mr. Cantrell as an instructor. We have also proven our additional claim that the defendant violated Imperial state law by entrusting Mr. Cantrell with a firearm. As my co-counsel, Ms. Newborn, explained earlier, this means that if the evidence we presented today tips the scale even slightly in favor of the plaintiff, then you must hold the defendant accountable for Justice Carbo's injuries. The greater weight of the evidence has clearly established that Drew Cantrell was incompetent in his role as a firearm safety instructor, that the defendant knew or should have known about this incompetence and that it created a risk to others, and that the defendant's negligence in hiring Mr. Cantrell was directly responsible for Mr. Carbo's injuries. The signs of Drew Cantrell's incompetence were clear. Sign number 1. In May of 2021, Drew Cantrell violated one of the most fundamental rules of gun safety. Never point a gun at something unless you intend to shoot it. Yet, as you heard from Ross Hernandez and Avery Nguyen, in a heated argument with another employee, Mr. Cantrell raised his gun and pointed it directly at his coworker. Mr. Cantrell should have been fired for this infraction. Sign number 2. Just 3 months later, Shooting Star decided to promote its employee, the one who had violated basic safety rules, to be its firearms safety instructor. But members of the jury, what evidence did you hear to suggest that Mr. Cantrell was fit for this position? A few pieces of paper, and that's it. Otherwise, Mr. Cantrell had no qualifications. He had no formal training and no instructional experience. What he did have was a criminal record that the defendant either knew about and ignored, or that they should have known about, that actually run a background check. Dr. Morgan Judd, an expert in firearm safety, testified that Drew Cantrell didn't meet the threshold to be an instructor. And yet, Mr. Cantrell was still promoted. All because, according to the defendant, Skylar Pullman, this promotion was good for checkbook. Sign number 3. In November of 2021, Mr. Cantrell violated yet another basic safety. You heard that he had brought a loaded gun into the shop. And when the defendant found out, what was the response? Just like the last time, a written and verbal warning, and she sent him right back out on the shooting range to teach others how to be safe. Again, Mr. Cantrell should have been fired, or at the very least, removed as an instructor. And yet, today you heard from Skylar Pullman that even if Mr. Cantrell was involved in another workplace incident, she wouldn't have removed him as an instructor. This leads us to May 28, 2022, when the defendant ran the risk. Justice Carbo, a self-proclaimed gun novice, goes to Shooting Star and takes a safety training course, reasonably anticipating an expert instructor. So, when Mr. Cantrell tells Mr. Carbo to stand right next to him during the shooting demonstration, he listened. After all, Mr. Cantrell was supposed to be the safest person on the range. Now, members of the jury, Justice Carbo may not have known the signs of a bad instructor, but the defendant did. Remember Skylar Pullman's last words to Drew Cantrell before sending him out to teach the safety course to Justice Carbo. I don't want to hear about any of your mistakes again today. Members of the jury, Shooting Star saw the signs. The defendant knew that Drew Cantrell pointed a gun at another person. The defendant knew that Mr. Cantrell had no qualifications and no experience. The defendant knew that Mr. Cantrell had brought a loaded gun into the shop. But in spite of seeing these signs, the defendant still permitted Mr. Cantrell to teach hundreds of safety courses for 6 months, until eventually, on May 28th, risk became reality. And now Justice Carbo is paying the price. We ask that you find the defendant liable.
Are you ready? Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin my closing, I'd ask that my clerk please be allowed to reposition so I can see the time card. Yes, you may. May it please the court, members of the jury. In 2008, Skylar Pullman takes ownership of Shooting Star. Until 2022, she owns and operates that gun range. She trains firearm safety instructors. She hires employees and sells firearms to the community without incident. In August of 2021, Drew Cantrell is promoted to be a firearm safety instructor. And for the next year, he teaches dozens upon dozens of safety courses without incident, without a single injury in that 8 years. Because what happened on May 28th, what happened to Justice Carbo was a freak accident, not a foreseeable. Now, today, the plaintiff had the burden to prove not only that Shooting Star Gun Club was negligent in hiring and retaining Drew Cantrell, but that it was reckless to entrust Mr. Cantrell with a firearm on that day. What that means is that Shooting Star Gun Club was aware of a substantially high risk of harm in entrusting Mr. Cantrell with a firearm, and that they disregarded it. A substantially high risk of harm in entrusting someone currently working as a firearm safety instructor. Now, to meet their burden, Shooting Star Gun, the plaintiff had to prove that what happened on May 28th was foreseeable. Not just that Mr. Cantrell had acted recklessly in the past, not just that he may have been responsible for what happened on May 28th, but that the shooting that occurred that day could have been reasonably foreseen when Shooting Star made the decision to promote Mr. Cantrell to safety instructor. So let's talk about that. Count turns completely on what Skylar Coleman did and what Skylar Coleman knew. So let's talk about what she knew. When she hired Mr. Cantrell, she knew he had a long history of experience handling firearms. Ms. Coleman knew Mr. Cantrell was twice certificated by the Imperial Department of Justice. Ms. Coleman knew Mr. Cantrell had observed other firearm safety instructors and received glowing reviews from Shooting Star's customers. Ms. Coleman knew that Mr. Cantrell had never made the same mistake twice in the course of his employment at Shooting Star, and that the incidents that did occur never even came close to injuring. As for what Ms. Coleman did, she interviewed Mr. Cantrell, someone who she had known for years, made sure he was properly certificated, made sure he had the knowledge he needed to be a firearm safety instructor. She reprimanded him after a basic mistake, reviewed the rules with him, and entered a note onto his record, threatening to fire him should something occur again. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not negligent. That is exactly as a reasonable person would do in that situation. And to expect that from those two incidents that the plaintiff wanted to highlight today, Ms. Coleman was supposed to not only fire Mr. Cantrell in anticipation of an accidental shooting, but refuse to give him a gun in the first place? That's just not. Let's talk about what the plaintiff had to offer you today. They had to prove both direct and proximate causation for that first element. For direct causation, they had to prove that but for the hiring of Drew Cantrell, Mr. Carbo never would have been shot. They did not meet that burden. They based this element completely on the testimony of one eyewitness, Mr. Carbo. Now, Mr. Carbo tried to deny it, deny his motivation in today's case on the stand. He wanted to say he was here for safety, for compensation. But when confronted with his sworn deposition, he admitted it. When asked about his motivation, he didn't say anything about it. He didn't say anything about safety. No. What he said is, I intend to take every last penny from Shooting Star if it's the last thing I do. That's why I'm here today. And he demonstrated that in his testimony when he was impeached. Twice. He testified that Ms. Coleman spent an hour throwing guns in his face when he had previously testified under oath that Ms. Coleman had spent an hour answering his questions and explaining safe gun handling practices. He testified that Drew Cantrell had only talked about firing the gun and pointing it downrange, when in fact he had previously testified about length, that the safe firearm handling rules Mr. Cantrell had reviewed. We know Justice Carbo lied. We know why Mr. Carbo lied. And when you go to deliberate today, the judge will instruct you that if you find a witness was being untruthful in one part of their testimony, you can disregard that testimony in its entirety. The plaintiff could not prove direct causation. Now, for proximate causation, they had to prove that in hiring Drew Cantrell, Shooting Star could have reasonably foreseen the injury in today's case or some similar injury. To that end, they called two witnesses. First, Ross Hernandez, who admitted on cross-examination that she had been specifically instructed what to include in her affidavit, and to that end been shown exhibits upon which she based that affidavit that she had never seen before. The plaintiff also called an expert, Dr. Judd. Dr. Judd was there to tell you that Drew Cantrell was unqualified, and tried to say that having both a firearm safety certificate and a firearms instructor certificate to meet the certifications requirement to be fit to be entrusted with a firearm wasn't enough. Based on Dr. Judd's standard, one would have to have years of training and experience to even pick up a firearm. Members of the jury, that is not a reasonable standard. You saw Dr. Judd. You saw how combative she was. She couldn't answer a single question on cross-examination. When she was specifically asked if she had any knowledge of Drew Cantrell violating a specific rule, she refused to admit that she did, and instead argued that because she had no evidence to prove he didn't violate it, she had to assume he did. She wasn't here testifying to any analysis, members of the jury. She was here arguing for the plaintiff. The plaintiff failed to prove proximate causation. And yet they still told you time and time again, Shooting Star saw the signs and took the risk anyway. Signs they're pointing to are two incidents that occurred in 2 years of employment at Shooting Star Gun Club. 2 incidents that never came close to injuring anyone. Members of the jury, let's be clear, we're talking about an unloaded gun and an empty shot. 2 incidents that did not take place in the gun range where the shooting on May 28th occurred. 2 incidents that did not take place during the course of a safety lesson, which Drew Cantrell had been teaching for almost a year without incident. 2 incidents that were never repeated. Those are the signs the plaintiff wants you to believe were sufficient for Shooting Star to foresee this accident and fire Mr. Cantrell. But ladies and gentlemen, it's unreasonable that those signs could have somehow indicated that to Shooting Star. And on top of that, it's unreasonable that Shooting Star could have foreseen the recoil in the gun that day. They could have foreseen that Mr. Carbo would knock into Mr. Cantrell during the course of a safety demonstration. Because, members of the jury, this was a freak accident.
not a foreseeable. We agree that what happened to Justice Carbo on May 28th was a tragedy. But Shooting Star Gun Club could not have it. So we ask that you find them not liable on both counts. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor, but I would like to request what my time remaining is and that my timekeeper be moved to the chair so I can see my time.
Plaintiff has 1 minute and 20 seconds.
I'd like to mention something that Miss Dutta just told you about what Mr. Carbo had said on the stand today and whether he was impeached. But I'd like to remind you that both Mr. Cantrell and Miss Coleman were also impeached. And in the words of Miss Dutta herself, if they were both untruthful in one regard, you must disregard the rest of that testimony. But I'd also like to talk about, as Miss Dutta showed you, what Miss Coleman knew. Miss Coleman knew that Drew Cantrell had violated multiple Shooting Star safety rules. And she knew that Mr. Cantrell only had one certificate, as she didn't mention the other one in her sworn deposition. Now, Miss Dutta and Mr. Cantrell today called the two previous incidents mistakes. And members of the jury, you saw Miss Coleman's text. I don't want to hear about any of your mistakes again today. Members of the jury, this wasn't a freak accident from a safe employee, as the defense claims. This was an inevitable tragedy.
Okay, trial of this matter has concluded. Okay, judges all finished our tabulations. If you may be circulating throughout the meeting, please come back so that we can give our final comments, and then you may move on from now, okay?
Oh, that's next. So you need to rank them for their ability to respond to objections and stuff, and then after that, you got. I didn't go. Which was the one for D? I think I already brought it. Yeah, that's. She think her too. What's her? I just yeah. I didn't tell you the final scores, so I guess it would be a. You have to tell you? No, you don't. They tell it doesn't on that. I'm sure. Kind of cool. I hope so. Yeah, I didn't tell you. That's really funny.
So I guess that means I'm good.
Yeah, you're good. So if you click back, you click the back scroll up and click the back to home. And it should say after the 9, just line, and then you'll be good.
Where do I go?
Just leave it, you're good. They'll log out for us to take care of the rest of it. Did you write it all on the ballot? I should probably get it too.
I put it all in there.
Oh, I mean, like anything that you did
No,
you
no,
do
no, I
paper?
started, but then I transferred.
Oh, that's fine.
I started doing it that way on my own notes, but the rest of that is completely blank.
Yeah, I'm sure it's. I'm just instructed to ask any of the judges just in case.
Yeah, that's fine. Mine's still blank.
Yeah. Good job, guys.
Thank you.
So we're good.
Okay. First of all,
Yes, well done.
first of all, I have to say, excellent job. And it was truly an honor to witness and watch and participating with each and every one of you today. This tournament and the caliber of the attorneys and witnesses that have come before have impressed me so much. I am a city judge, and each and every one of you, I would say, could step in the courtroom tomorrow. Some of the witnesses might get in trouble with a hat on in the courtroom, but other than that, I did appreciate you taking it off when you took this skill. Excellent job. You guys are making focus. I'm not gonna go into the context because right now I'm gonna go more into how your presence was going forward. First of all, Attorney Pierce, excellent ability to remain calm, get your points in, knowing your clock is ticking down pretty quickly and rapidly, and you stayed on point. So to that, I have to commend a lot of other attorneys would have been frazzled, would have tried to rush everything, but you did an excellent job. Thank you. Cross-examination by far, I thought was some of your best work today, because all manner of cross-examination, amazing. The hostile witness, wow. That was probably the best hostile witness I ever had in my investigation. So you can read through your character. Well done on that one. And excellent job in handling the hostile witness. Okay, excellent. Each of you, and what I was impressed with, you handled the transitions so well. You use your tone, you trained it so well. You guys were coaches. Coaches, excellent job. You demonstrated the ability of knowing when to move in certain areas in the world. All of you did it well. To take away the attention from the witness and put it on to the lawyer to get your claim. To put more attention on the witness so the jury was focusing on the witness and versus what the lawyer was saying. Direct examination, very little reading, which is amazing. So all in all, I know that you guys are ready to go to sleep for tonight to start back up tomorrow. I just have to say, I am thoroughly impressed and amazed. And I know that each and every one of you are going to be excellent going forward. Now,
I guess I can give my brief comments. I'm a Chicago mock trial student, so I am in the same position as you are in college. I would say the two big things that stuck out to me that I think both teams need to work on. Movement about the well was a big one. Just across the board speeches. This is your place to command. Command it. You own the well. Second thing, volume. Make sure you're projecting, especially for a judge and jury who are in different parts of the room. You want to make sure your voice fills this space. You own this place again. And I'm going to add an extra third thing here, objections. I would like to see a little bit more. I know each team has their own style for objections. Anything that might seem objectionable, maybe try something. It might get sustained. But overall, I thought your argumentation of it was good, which is why I don't think it's a make or team. But yeah, great job to both teams. Keep improving for the future. Look forward to seeing you guys in college if you decided to do it.
So I'm going to try not to tread in the same territory that's already been brought up, but let me mention just something about me, because you probably should need to know who these people are. I'm a circuit court judge in Cook County. I'm the supervising judge of the civil division. So these are cases I hear all the time, and I try juries all the time. I will say that a couple of things worth repeating. You guys are all great. You have a commanding performance and you're comfortable. And you're yourself. Don't be me. Don't be this judge. Don't be this juror. Be yourself. Okay. You all had great recall of the materials. There's no question you all knew everything. You had things tabbed and ready to go. Your exhibits were all in order, and it was a smooth flowing case. So you should all be applauded for all of that. There is one thing I think everybody, including most attorneys who appear in front of all the judges throughout the entire country, need to be familiar with. You guys all know your material, like I'm sure you went to sleep last night, and maybe tonight, reiterating everything that's going on. Never miss the opportunity, however, to use the witness's words from that chair that are not in your materials. By that, I mean this. This expert witness who got up and was combative and said, 20,000 is what a PhD gets, and then didn't have the certification that Cantrell had and said, I don't know anything about that. That's a paid hired gun that used words she was not familiar with something. She's the expert witness in this case. Kill her. I mean, absolutely destroy her with her own words. Don't be afraid of doing so, okay? But remember, the moral of the story is not that witness. The moral of the story is pay attention to what the witnesses are saying. Use their words against them. You guys had scripted materials, perfect. But you never know what they're going to say until they actually say it, okay? There was another witness, Cantrell, got up and said stupid mistakes. You shot a guy, okay? I guess there's one question I have for you, though. One of the exhibits had red, yellow, and blue markings on where the various people were. Cantrell is supposed to be firing according to the rules, pointing the gun at a place where you want to shoot, and only in that place. I think the blue, it might have been off in the color, where the justice was standing was slightly behind him, right? So if Cantrell's pointing downrange at all times, even if he gets bumped, causing the gun to discharge, how could he shoot somebody who's behind him?
We've been wondering that.
Yeah, same.
It's something to argue, both sides. And I'll tell you as a last note, well, second to last note, anytime a lawyer or a judge says, I got one more thing, there's like four. Cases like this are the ones that go to trial. And by that, I mean this. Both of your sides had material to work with. Both of your sides had your strengths and the other side's weaknesses. Cases that are clear-cut cases don't go to trial. They resolve. These are the cases that go to trial. So is it part of the materials to give you all something to work with? Yes. But is it real life? Absolutely. These are the cases that go to trial. This is why we have jury trials. Okay. I want to end on a high note for everybody, which is reiterate, not based on my knowledge of anything other than what I saw here today. You guys are great. If you're considering a path towards law school and litigation, I would encourage all of you to continue to do so. It's a long road, but you started very well here. And you all stay true to yourselves, which I think is the most important thing a trial lawyer should ever do. Stay true to yourself. Don't be what you think they want to hear. Be you and present your case like you did here today. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for taking.
So much. No, great job. Thank you.
Similar to the guy from that photo.
I actually have gotten that before. I have gotten
Because I was like looking over the entire time.
You were
and
like, it's not the guy.
I'm like, is this the guy?
It's not the guy. I wish I was. I think he's a little older than I am, just by a couple of years.
Okay, no, because I was just like,
No, you're good. Thank you.
Thank
Of
you
course.
so much.
Yeah, great job. Great job. Great job to all of you.
Thank you for the
Way to go,
wonderful
witness.
comments.
Nice job.
Thank
You guys
you.
did wonderful.
Thank you for judging.
No problem. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Nice stand present too, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, I do theater. So.
Do you?
That's why they pick me as guest.
Well, that's all right. That's the way to do it. Good job.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful job, everybody. Thank you very much. Great opportunity to watch.
Thank you.
Good job.
Nice job.
Thank you for your time.
No, of course. Great job.
Thank you for judging. My computer stuff.
I look forward to coming to school. I look forward to coming to see you. Watching here live.
Thanks
We appreciate you guys being here.
No.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It doesn't. We did some of the trial, and it's been like all out of the one time. Yeah, it's fun for you.